I took a job as a caretaker for an abandoned summer camp deep in the woods. It was a seasonal gig just for the winter months, watching over the place while the owners were away. I'd be alone, but that was fine. I wanted the solitude, needed it really. The camp itself was nothing special. 10 or 12 cabins, a dining hall, a lake just past the tree line. It had been closed down for a few years after a series of unfortunate accidents. The owners planned to renovate and reopen, but they needed someone to keep an eye on the property in the meantime. That someone was me. The first week was easy. I kept the fireplace going in the main cabin, took occasional walks through the camp to make sure no animals or squatters had moved in, and read books by lantern light when the generator sputtered out. The cold was biting, the snow thick, but I was comfortable. Then I started hearing things. It began as a faint knocking sound late at night, always coming from outside. I assumed it was branches tapping against the cabin, wind shifting the old wooden buildings. But the more I listened, the more deliberate it seemed. Knock. Pause. Knock. Knock. One night, I stepped outside with a flashlight to investigate. The cold stung my face. Snow stretched untouched across the ground. There were no footprints leading up to my cabin, no signs of life anywhere. I locked the door behind me that night. The next morning, I noticed something strange. One of the other cabin doors was open, just slightly, swaying with the wind. I knew for a fact I had checked all the cabins when I first arrived. I walked over, pushed the door open wider, and shined my flashlight inside. Empty. But the dust on the floor had been disturbed. It wasn't an animal. I would have seen tracks in the snow outside. Someone had been inside. That night, the knocking returned. Closer this time. I sat in my chair by the fire, heart pounding, gripping the hatchet I kept nearby for splitting wood. Knock, knock, knock. I forced myself to stay put. If someone wanted to break in, they could have done it by now. Instead, they were waiting, testing me. I barely slept. The next day, I hiked the perimeter of the camp, looking for footprints, tire tracks, anything. There was nothing but untouched snow and silent trees. I checked the cabins again, locking every door, making sure the windows were shut tight. That night, I kept the fire low and turned off the lantern early, sitting in the dark, listening. Midnight came. The wind howled through the trees. Then, the knocking started. Knock, knock, knock. And then, something new. A voice. It was faint, distorted by the wind, but I heard it. Let me in. My blood ran cold. I gripped the hatchet tighter. I didn't move, didn't breathe. Then came another sound. Footsteps. Slow, crunching in the snow, circling the cabin. A shadow flickered just beyond the frosted window. I stayed awake until dawn, heart pounding with every noise. When the first light broke through the trees, I opened the door, expecting to see footprints in the snow, a trail leading away, proof that I hadn't imagined it. But there was nothing, no footprints, no disturbances, just the wind howling through the empty camp. I packed my things that morning, left the keys under a rock near the main gate, and started hiking back toward town. As I reached the tree line, I turned back one last time. Every cabin door was open, and in the distance, by the lake, a dark figure stood watching. I never looked back again. I work late shifts at a gas station off the highway, about 15 miles outside the nearest town. It's not much, but it pays the bills while I save up for something better. Nights are quiet for the most part. Truckers stopping in for coffee, the occasional lost traveler needing directions, and locals picking up cigarettes or beer. The station itself is old, one of those single-building setups with a little convenience store inside. It's got the usual rows of snacks, a couple of coolers humming in the back, a grimy restroom that I wouldn't use unless my life depended on it. I sit behind the counter, passing the time by reading, listening to the radio, or watching the security monitors when it's slow. About a month ago, something changed. It started small, little things I could brush off, items falling off shelves when no one was around, the bathroom door creaking open despite being locked, a flickering light overhead even though the bulb was brand new. I told myself it was just the building settling, or maybe my own exhaustion playing tricks on me. Then I started noticing the car. It was an old, beat-up sedan, the kind that blends into the background if you're not looking for it. The first time I saw it, it was parked at the far end of the lot, near the tree line. I figured it was just someone taking a nap before getting back on the road. It happens more than you'd think. But an hour later, it was still there. Another hour passed, and it didn't move. No one came in. No one got out. Just a dark silhouette sitting in the driver's seat. I watched it on the monitors for a while before stepping outside for a cigarette, pretending not to notice the way my hands shook a little. The air was cold, still. I glanced at the car, but the windows were too dark to see inside. I took a long drag and told myself I was being paranoid. Maybe the driver had just dozed off. The next night, the car was back. Same spot. Same unmoving silhouette behind the wheel. This time, I didn't go outside. It became a pattern. Every night, just before midnight, the car would roll in and park in the exact same spot. Never closer, never farther. Always there. Always watching. I told my manager about it, but he just shrugged. As long as they're not causing trouble, leave it alone, he said. People are weird. That didn't help. I tried ignoring it, but when you're the only person working a graveyard shift at a lonely gas station, ignoring a silent, watching presence isn't as easy as it sounds. One night, I decided to test something. At about 11:45, I turned off all the interior lights except for the ones behind the counter, then sat low in my chair so it looked like the place was empty. I kept my eyes on the monitors. Sure enough, right on schedule, the car crept in. But instead of parking right away, it idled at the entrance, like the driver was unsure. Then, slowly, it rolled past the pumps and pulled up alongside the building, right outside my window. The hairs on my arms stood up. I barely breathed. The window wasn't tinted, but the inside of the car was still too dark to make out any details. I saw movement, a slight shift in the silhouette. Then, A knock. Not at the front door. Not on the glass of the convenience store. On the window right next to me. I nearly fell out of my chair. My breath caught in my throat. I didn't turn my head, didn't move. Another knock. Gentle, rhythmic. I swallowed hard, forcing my voice to stay steady. "We're closed," I lied. Silence. Then, after a long pause, the car slowly pulled away, rolling back into its usual spot near the trees. I didn't sleep the next day. The next night, I asked a coworker to switch shifts with me, just for one night. I needed to see if it was me the driver was watching, or just the store itself. My coworker agreed. I stayed home, barely able to sit still. When my shift would have started, I called the station. My coworker answered. "Yeah, everything's fine," he said. "Slow night." I waited until midnight before asking the question that made my stomach twist. "Anyone parked out back?" A pause. No." I hung up without explaining. The next night, when I went back to work, the car was there. That confirmed it. Whoever was in that car wasn't watching the station. They were watching me. I thought about calling the cops, but what would I say? That a car was parking in my lot every night? That someone knocked on the window once? No laws were being broken. That night, at 11:55, I made a decision. I grabbed a flashlight, stepped outside, and walked toward the car. The cold night air pressed in around me. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. As I approached, I raised the flashlight, shining it into the windshield. The glare bounced back at me, obscuring everything inside, but I could still make out the silhouette. It wasn't moving. I took another step closer. "Hey," I called out. "You need something?" No response. I walked up to the driver's side window and tapped on the glass. "You can't just sit here every night," I said, trying to keep my voice firm. Still, nothing. No movement. No reaction. I felt my stomach tighten. I reached for the door handle. My fingers barely brushed against it when the figure inside twisted violently, slamming their face against the glass. I stumbled back, heart hammering in my chest. The flashlight flickered. For the first time, I saw the driver's face. It was grinning, wide, like their cheeks would split apart. Their teeth were bared, yellow and uneven, and their eyes weren't right. They were large, dark, and they didn't blink. Just stared at me, that awful grin stretching impossibly far. I turned and ran. I didn't look back until I was inside, door locked, hands shaking so badly I could barely grab my phone. I called the cops. By the time they arrived, the car was gone. They took my statement, nodded along, but I could tell they didn't believe me. "If they come back, give us a call," one of the officers said. They never did come back, but every night since, just before midnight, I feel it. Something watching, something waiting. And some nights, when the wind is still, I swear I can hear it. the sound of knuckles gently rapping against glass. I've never been one to believe in ghost stories. I'm the kind of person who needs logic, facts, proof. I work with my hands, fixing things, making them work again. The world, to me, has always been made of gears and wires, of things you can see and touch. But there are some things I still can't explain. It happened 3 years ago, on a long stretch of highway in the middle of the desert. I was driving cross-country for work, something I did often. I liked the solitude, the long hours of nothing but the hum of the engine and the endless road ahead. It was late, sometime after midnight, and the nearest town was miles behind me. The stars were out, the moon was high, and the desert stretched out on either side of the road like a dark, endless ocean. That's when I saw her. A figure standing on the side of the road. A woman alone in the middle of nowhere. She was wearing a pale dress that fluttered slightly in the breeze, and her long hair hung loose around her shoulders. At first, I thought she was just another hitchhiker, but something about her posture, the way she stood so still, made me uneasy. I slowed down, debating whether to stop. Every rational thought told me to keep driving. I'd seen enough horror movies to know how this went, but I couldn't just leave her there. What if she really needed help? What if she was stranded? I pulled over. As I rolled down the window, she turned her head toward me. Her face was pale, her eyes dark and hollow, like she hadn't slept in days. "Do you need a ride?" I asked, trying to keep my voice even. She didn't answer right away. Then, finally, she nodded and walked toward the passenger side door. The way she moved made my skin crawl, slow, deliberate, almost hesitant. She opened the door and got in without a word. "Where are you headed?" I asked, trying to shake the uneasy feeling creeping up my spine. Again, silence. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, "Just a little farther." I didn't know what that meant, but I put the truck in drive and pulled back onto the road. The silence in the cab was thick, almost suffocating. Every so often, I glanced at her from the corner of my eye. She was staring straight ahead, hands folded in her lap, her expression unreadable. After a few miles, I couldn't take it anymore. "So, what were you doing out there?" I asked, trying to keep my tone casual. She didn't answer. Then she turned her head and looked at me. And I swear to God, her eyes were completely black. I nearly slammed on the brakes. My pulse hammered in my throat, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. Then, just as quickly as it happened, she turned away, looking back out the windshield. Her eyes looked normal again, just dark, empty. I swallowed hard, gripping the wheel until my knuckles turned white. "You okay?" I forced out, though I already knew something was terribly wrong. "It's almost time," she murmured. "Time for what?" I asked, my voice barely steady. She didn't answer. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and a deep, primal fear settled in my gut. Something wasn't right. I had to get her out of my truck. I spotted a gas station up ahead, its neon lights flickering in the distance. "I need to stop for gas," I lied. "You can get out there." She didn't move, didn't react. As I pulled into the station, I turned to look at her fully for the first time since she got in. She was gone. The passenger seat was empty. The door hadn't opened. There was no sign that anyone had ever been there. I sat there, heart pounding, hands shaking on the wheel. I looked around the lot, but there was no one. Just the empty desert and the endless night. I never finished that trip. I turned around and drove straight home, barely stopping. I didn't sleep for days, replaying that night over and over in my head, trying to convince myself it was just exhaustion, just my mind playing tricks on me. But I know what I saw. And sometimes, when I'm driving late at night, I still see her, standing by the side of the road, waiting. I never thought much about the house at the end of our street. It had been abandoned for as long as I could remember, a crumbling relic with boarded-up windows and a sagging roof. The kids in the neighborhood made up stories about it, the kind of ghost tales meant to scare each other, but I was never one to believe in that sort of thing. That changed the night I went inside. I was 16, bored, and trying to prove a point to my friends. We'd dared each other to go in a dozen times, but no one ever had the guts. That night, I told them I'd do it, alone. The front door was locked, of course, but a broken basement window gave me an easy way in. I hesitated for only a moment before crawling through, feeling the crunch of shattered glass beneath my hands and knees. The air inside was thick, heavy, with the scent of dust, mildew, and something faintly metallic, like old blood. My flashlight flickered as I swept it across the basement, revealing rusted pipes, discarded furniture, and a staircase leading up into the darkness. I told myself it was just an old house, nothing more. Then I heard the whispering. At first, I thought it was the wind slipping through the broken windows, but the longer I listened, the clearer it became. Soft voices, hushed and urgent, coming from upstairs. It wasn't just one voice. It was multiple, overlapping, speaking in a rhythm that sent a chill down my spine. I strained to make out the words, but they were muffled, distorted, like a conversation just beyond the reach of understanding. I should have left. Any rational person would have. But something in me needed to know, needed to see. The stairs groaned under my weight as I climbed. Each step felt like it took an eternity, my breath loud in the suffocating silence. The whispering stopped the moment I reached the landing. The hallway stretched out before me, doors lining either side. Most were open, revealing empty, decayed rooms with sagging ceilings and peeling wallpaper. But at the very end of the hall, one door was shut tight. Something about it made my skin crawl. I stepped forward. My fingers trembled as I reached for the knob. The moment I touched it, the whispering started again, right behind me. I spun around, heart hammering. The hallway was empty. Then the door creaked open on its own. The room beyond was nothing but darkness, a void that swallowed my flashlight's beam. And from that blackness, something moved, a shape, tall and thin, just at the edge of the light. It stood motionless, its head tilted slightly as if watching me. My stomach twisted into knots. I tried to step back, but my legs wouldn't move. Then it spoke. A whisper, impossibly close to my ear. You came back. I didn't wait to see what it meant. I turned and ran, nearly tripping down the stairs in my panic. The whispering followed me, growing louder, more desperate. The voices now seemed to come from everywhere, above, beside me, inside my own head. I dove through the basement window, hitting the ground hard. Scrambling to my feet, I didn't stop running until I was back in the safety of my own home. My friends were waiting outside, laughing and shouting when they saw me sprinting toward them. "Holy shit, you actually did it." One of them clapped me on the back, grinning. "Did you see a ghost or something?" I doubled over, panting, my hands on my knees. My skin was slick with sweat, my heart still hammering. I looked up at them, at their carefree faces, their amusement, and realized there was no way to explain what had just happened. They wouldn't believe me. Hell, I barely believed it myself. "Yeah," I finally managed, forcing a shaky laugh. "Real spooky in there." "Dude, you're pale as hell," another one said, nudging me. "You okay?" I swallowed hard and nodded, just out of breath. We stood there for a while, their excitement buzzing around me like static. I wanted to tell them everything, the voices, the dark figure, the way it had spoken as if it knew me, but instead, I let them believe it was just another stupid dare, another harmless thrill. That night, I dreamed of the house, of the whispers calling my name, of the door at the end of the hall slowly opening, of something standing there, waiting. The house is still there, abandoned and rotting. I never went back, but sometimes, late at night, when the wind is still, I swear I can hear the whispering, calling me back.